You're going to put a chicken in every pot for us. No, fish and bread in every pot for us. Do a lot of politicians try and get elected based on they're going to provide for everybody's needs? You elect me, and your life's going to be easier, and you'll have more money in the bank. I'm going to help take care of your bills. That's pretty common. People will often vote for a Messiah that is got promises of political advantage. It says when they perceived that Jesus, in verse 15, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, they were going to grab him like some boxing champion, put him on their shoulders, go marching him off into battle. So you're going to be king. You're invincible. You have power over the elements. What did Jesus do? He departed. Why? They were looking for the wrong kingdom. They wanted a physical kingdom. They wanted a political Messiah. Didn't Jesus? They tried to suck Jesus into those political battles time and time again. Remember, should we pay taxes to Caesar or should we just pay it to the temple? What do you say? What did Christ do? He said, you're not pulling me into that political debate. You render to Caesar what's Caesar's. You render to God's what's God's. I'm not here with a political agenda. I'm here to establish a spiritual kingdom. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you having political views. I do. I'll be happy to share with you, but I know too much to do it during a sermon. But I'm saying that it is separate in my mind from the spiritual kingdom. And they wanted Jesus to overthrow the Romans and set them up. So then you pass from that story and it says there's a storm. Jesus, he needs to break up the crowd before it turns into a riot and they force him in being king. He tells the disciples, get in the boat and cross the sea. I'll meet you. So they obediently, they get in their boats and they start to row across the sea. And that night there's a storm. And as they're crossing the sea, they see Jesus walking towards them. And first they're scared. And finally he says, don't be afraid, it's me. And you know the story. Peter says, Lord, if it's you, then bid that I come to you on the water. He says, come. Peter gets out, and as long as he keeps his eyes on Jesus, he walks on the water. But then he takes his eyes off Christ, and he looks at the wind and the waves. He gets scared. His faith sinks, and then he sinks shortly after his faith sinks. At the last moment, Peter reaches up. He says, Lord, save me. Jesus pulls him out of the water. Says, why did you doubt? Brings him back to the boat. When they get in the boat, the wind ceases. Not only does the wind cease, John adds something interesting to that story. John chapter 6, verse 21. They willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. Well, if you read back a few verses, when they left, they rode 3 or 4 furlongs. They're out in the middle of the lake. It's about 7 miles across. They're out in the middle of the lake when this happens. When Jesus gets in the boat, they're at their destination. Another point I don't want to rush past because I think it's got a good lesson. They're in a storm. They're not making much headway. They're rowing with all their might, but they're not getting anywhere. When Jesus gets in the boat, he finds them doing their best to obey him. He told them to cross the sea. They're trying to cross the sea, but they can't do it until he gets in the boat. But he gets in the boat while they're doing humanly what they can do. Did you hear that? He did a miracle for them when they took the first steps to do what he had told them to do. So many people are waiting for God to do a miracle of obedience for them when they're not making any human effort to do what God told them to do. In going, they were cleansed. As we take the first steps to do what God tells us to do, it's in going and in rowing that he performs the miracles. Sometimes you got to put your feet in the water. But then he gets into the boat and instantly they're at the destination. Now, when you read this same story in Matthew chapter 14, don't lose your place in John, but you might turn quickly to Matthew 14, 32, 33. Notice, when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, see, this is what Peter says in John chapter 6. What is the response of true disciples to Jesus? Worship. They see a miracle. They don't say, hey, this is pretty good. Can you do that? They see a miracle and they worship Him. They say, you are God. You are in charge. Who was in the boat? These are the disciples that stayed with Him. Notice a distinction here. They're following Jesus because they worship Him. This is going to be the big issue in the last days. True worship, false worship. Those who worship the beast, they worship him. And then there's those who have the seal of God who worship God. Now, when he gets to the other side of the sea, I wish sometimes I had a map I had put up and could help you visualize this. Christ is on a mountain. Here you got the sea, you got the disciples, you got the boats. They're trying to make him king. He says to the disciples, in front of the crowds all watching, he couldn't hide back then. He had no bodyguard. He sent the disciples away. He said, you guys get across the sea, I'll join you. He tells the crowd to disperse. He goes up the mountain to pray. The crowd knows that Jesus is going to ultimately go where his disciples are. And so they start following the disciples. Some get into boats. Some start running around the road that goes along the shoreline, which is about 40 miles. And they go all night. And others, they row all night to try and get there. The next morning, when Jesus is at the shore, in the boat with the disciples, they go, how did you do that? Lord, how did you get here? And you know what Jesus says to him? John chapter 6, verse 26. Jesus said, most assuredly I say, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but you ate the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to everlasting life. In other words, they had rowed all night and walked all night to get to where they knew Jesus was going to be. And now they say, where's breakfast? You miraculously gave us food back then. Now they want their free breakfast. Jesus reads their hearts. Hey, Lord, we can follow you as long as you want us to follow you. I mean, you fed us. Why would we go anywhere? And he says, you're laboring for the wrong kind of food. You're following me for the wrong kind of reason. And a lot of the remainder of the chapter, he makes a distinction between the food of the world and the real food that God wanted to give, which was Jesus, the bread of life. Now, I want to turn real quick to, I want to go to the next verse now. John chapter 6, verse 28. So they're asking him for free food. They're following him once again for the provision. John 6, verse 28. Then they said unto him, what shall we